Hi everybody. So I'm Dr. Henri. I'm from the University of Hull, and I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you guys about a project that we've been running that's been centred at Hull and funded by the QAA over the last couple of years. And we've been going around the country, going to various people such as yourselves, and asking the question, what's the point of assessment? We all spend a huge amount of time doing assessment. We know assessment is one of the primary drivers of what students do on their course and how they engage and what they turn up to and what they spend their time doing when they're not attending lectures and all of this kind of stuff. But do we as a community, as an education community, do we have a clear idea of what it is that we're trying to achieve with all of this effort? And do we all think the same thing? So out of interest, how many people here are familiar with the concept of competence-based education? Couple of people. Okay, so the idea of competence-based education, just for people who aren't familiar, is something that evolved primarily in the context of vocational degrees or vocational training, where we are looking at the idea of what a student can do. So often we have a clear idea about what a student is going to be after they graduate. They're going to be a bricklayer or a dentist or a nurse, and then we are going, okay, well, what are the things that they need to be able to do that effectively? And then we're going to design a course around testing and developing the doing more than the knowing. And this is something that is sort of becoming a bigger part or a way by which higher education is addressing some of the concerns that have been levelled about what it is that higher education is achieving for its students. So there are, the persistence of lots of literature around skills gaps, about whether students are actually prepared for the workforce that they are joining by attending university, and what is it that university is achieving and what is it supposed to achieve in the first place. The reason I talk about competence-based education is because it's something that Hull have gone into with both feet and sort of wholeheartedly into as this method of looking at changing and addressing, well, how can we best prepare students for the future? And there are a number of different competence-based education frameworks, but they broadly align to this idea of education as something that develops what students know, what they do, and who they are. So the knowing, doing, and being. And competence-based education is this shift away from developing and assessing students as knowledge, as knowers, towards doers and beers. But that's actually quite complicated. So it's a lot more challenging to assess who a student is than what they know. So, what is the purpose of assessment? Does anyone want to give me their ideas about what is it that we're trying to achieve with this? What are we trying to do? Go on. Yes.
I come from life sciences and medicine, so obviously we do quite a lot of competency-based education. I suppose it's got different purposes depending on the context in which you're operating within higher education. So, for example, in life sciences and medicine, for our courses that are regulated, so pharmacy, physiotherapy, medicine, some of it is around certification with the DSRB. Yeah. So the purpose of assessment is for students to be able to gain their certification with the regulatory body. Is one aspect of it.
Yeah. So this is a really helpful thing when we have a degree with a really clear endpoint, like a vocational or professionally focused one, that can be really helpful because we know the purpose of our course is to prepare students to be, and assessment is where they evidence that they can do that. So that can be really helpful. What else? What oh, so we'll go with hands up. Yes, sir. Is it Bennett? Yeah. Okay, yeah, so this is really helpful. So when we have the sort of the professional, the PSRB, we have the learning outcomes that are associated with doing X, but ultimately assessment is the only point of the course where we assess whether the course has worked. Yeah, at the back. Yeah.
But I also think the assessment really, if you really think about it also from the perspective of the student, should in itself be a learning experience.
Fantastic. Yeah, so this is really nice. It's not just the end point, but it's also that point where students develop and engage, where they go, oh, okay, this is where I am, and then I've got an expert assessor saying, here are some areas to grow. Yes.
I think, in my opinion, from different industries, like the creative industry, business studies, it's really measuring not only the learning and achievement, but also looking at the different, and I'm sure all the universities, they have different framework, like working together, learning, career readiness, entrepreneurial. We talk a lot about entrepreneurial and enterprise, and how we make sure that we reflect that in our education and how students perceive that in their current or future career.
Yeah, so again, this is a really, really helpful thing. It's not just necessarily about preparing students for a future, but helping them understand what that future is going to be so they can make more informed choices. Yeah.
I think on top of some of those things as well, the motivational aspect to it, you directed at a particular goal.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to design it well, because if you're not doing that, you're not pointing them to the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we the thing that I say when I'm doing sort of workshops around this, and we talk about assessment as part of the curriculum, we say, well, a student can engage with everything on your course. Like they can attend all the lectures, all the practicals, all the, all the things, but if they don't submit anything, they don't pass. Similarly, they can attend nothing. And as long as they submit all of the assessment, or potentially get generative AI to do all that assessment and get away with it, they can pass with a first. So we like to try and bring across this idea: assessment is the curriculum. The assessment, when we are assessing this, we are telling students what is valuable about what they have learned. And I think all of those things together paint this idea of assessment. Assessment is having to do a lot of things. And not all of those things are necessarily going to work in harmony all the time. And not everybody agrees about what it is that we are trying to achieve. So we've been using this idea of or this methodology called a Q-sort. I stole it from psychology. I'm a biologist. I knew nothing about how we measure people's perceptions of stuff. There was a fantastic paper by Kieran Ballou that used this with students, and I just thought, that's it. That's what we've got to do. So the Q-sort board's amazing. We have a series of 18 statements about what the purpose of assessment is, and people who attend the workshop work in groups to say, well, what's the most important purpose of assessment to that group, and what's the least important? And the thing about the Q-sort is you can't just go, it's all important. You can't just go, everything's important, we've got to do all of those things. So we start thinking about prioritization. We start thinking about, well, actually, if it's supposed to achieve all of these things, but we as educators only have a limited amount of capacity, and our students have an ever decreasing amount of capacity to engage with the course, how can we prioritize those learning experiences to make sure that they are maximizing the value of their learning? So we've run this across 7 universities, across loads and loads of different subjects. So not just within sciences, but with subjects like paramedics and business departments and accounting and everything that we can possibly think of, across multiple universities, from further education to to high-ranking universities. It's around about 120 individuals. That can't see that particularly well, unfortunately. But these are the things that people agree on. So these are the ones that consistently come up as being, yes, we think those things are important. And these are the ones that people consistently come up and say, well, these are less important. And I'm going to start with the less important one, because I think there's something really interesting here. Grading students' work so that comparisons can be made between students, and indicating the overall employability of a student. Now, arguably, if you are a stakeholder outside of university, that's kind of the point, right, of assessment. But if you're not an educator, and to a certain extent this is what students think as well, that is what we're trying to achieve. And I'd also say the vast majority of effort that we put into our assessment in terms of designing it and marking it is aimed at those things. Well, definitely that one, less so that one, because most people agree within the sector that actually you can't indicate the overall employability of the student with a percentage-based grade. Is that fair? People in this room generally agree. Like it's not inclusive. It's not accurate. It's just it just does. And yet, when a student leaves with a transcript, what do they leave with? They leave with a classification that is supposed to give, that's primarily focused on giving us that. So I think this is really interesting that as a sector, we generally agree that these things are really unimportant. And yet I feel that we spend an inordinate amount of time and a lot of our assessment design is focused on doing those things. And this was something that came up particularly interesting in the sort of profession focused one. So, in the context of this, indicate the overall employability of a student. For something like paramedics or nursing, if a student has passed with whatever grade, they are a competent X. That's the purpose of the course. So then what actually is the difference between someone who's graduated from medicine with a first or a 2-2? They're not actually a better X. They're just, what is it that they've done, and why have we spent so much effort and time in doing it? We also like these things. So the things that we generally agree on: developing students as independent learners who have ownership and direction of their learning and future aspirations. This is really nice. Like we generally, again, as a community, agree one of the real values of higher education is about autonomy, independence, responsibility, and ownership. And it's a space where students can take academic ownership of what they learn, where they learn it, and what they do with it. And that's kind of their responsibility. And again, a really nice one, providing feedback so learners can close the gap. So this idea of actually assessment is not just the end point, it's about development as well. So it's really nice that there are some things that we really agree on. And again, these ideas around preparation for a specific career or sort of transferable careers. This was an interesting one: provide a reliable and objective measurement of a student's ability to evidence programme competency. A lot of people took some issue with the word objective. The literature supports very much the idea that marking is not objective. In fact, the literature supports the idea that marking is very much subjective. And so maybe we might want to do a bit more if this is something that we actually want to achieve. So reliable and objective measurements. But they had a problem with it when it was related to strengths and weaknesses. So those are the things that we broadly agree on, and I would argue that they're not necessarily the things that we spend the most time doing. So there's a bit of a constructive disalignment, right? We broadly agree on what we want assessment to do, but we wouldn't necessarily say that our assessment or the traditional assessment strategy is focused on achievement. So these are the things that people disagree about, and this is where the conversations got really interesting, because these caused some real big dongs. Right? There was some real conversation about what it is that we're trying to achieve, and this resulted in some, in some serious conversation and disagreement between people. And I think in here we see some differences in the philosophical approach about what higher education is supposed to do and what it feasibly can do. And I think this is the space in which we as educators need to start working about, okay, well, actually, how can we get some level of agreement and communication with students about what it is that we're trying to do? And then what are the pedagogies that will actually allow us to do this? So this was a really big one: develop student capacity to become an engaged and informed citizen. This is one of the broadly touted values of having a tertiary education sector, right? Is that fair? One of the main values of having universities in society is to develop engaged citizens. Well, the question would be, if a significant number of people don't agree that assessment can do that, where does that happen in the course? If that's one of the primary values to society of having university, where does it happen? How can we evidence that that is what universities are achieving? And what is it about the course exactly that does that? And if we don't understand that, then we can't maximize it. Is this idea? Again, reliable and objective measurement of the quality of students' work. particularly reliable and objective were the difficult words here. So this was about this idea about whether we can effectively measure that. This develops student perseverance, confidence, and other psychological attributes. We know that assessment will have one of the biggest impacts on student self-efficacy out of any other part of the course. We know that we can build student confidence or destroy it with how we choose to assess. Now, ideally, we would want a course, if we want students to be able to go out and to be resilient and to engage with a working environment where they can flourish, then realistically, we need to design assessment that will build student confidence and allow them to have that self-efficacy to be resilient. And I think this was a really interesting thing. A lot of the people who disagree with that saying, well, actually, either I don't know how to build a course around that, I don't know what assessment looks like that does that effectively, or I don't believe that is my job. I believe that the course is the filter. So if you succeed on the course, you'll develop confidence. And if you don't succeed on the course, you won't. And that is not my responsibility as the educator. I think that was a really interesting sort of point of difference there about to what extent it's their responsibility and to what extent that is actually feasible as a mechanism. But we know as you talk to any student about how they're feeling, where their stress and emotion levels are when they're on their course, it almost always boils down to either assessment or community. So we know that what we choose to do can have a significant impact. And this is a big one again. So similar to confidence, the idea of graduate attributes. Out of interest, how many of your institutions have a graduate attributes framework or something similar to that? Okay. How many of you guys have assessments that are designed to allow students to evidence that? Very good. This is very forward thinking. Fantastic. So what do those assessments look like for you guys? Yeah, go.
My case, we were talking about student citizenship, etc. For the creative students, what we did, for example, I worked with the Brand Council in a project last year called We Were Heritage, and I made students from events, faculty marketing students, and faculty design students working 52 ethnic minority, and the final outcome, students were assessed on the final outcome, and well, we were surprised that actually last September we were invited by Jimmy Choo for the London. We did the premiere of the London Fashion Show at LFW, and like it was an assessment throughout the year.
Yeah.
And most of students use that like to capitalize on it at the at the portfolios to go for the job. And that particular cohort, we had on the data on the G3 matrix, we had a graduate back on 20%. I think we never had it in our university. So I think it's like co-originals talking about group position, because when I collected the data, comments were like, oh, after all, cultures are not different. We're all the same. And I think this is what we need to educate students. Global citizenship is very important.
Does that sound sort of roughly similar to other people's assessments that are on this line about sort of embedded in the real world, opportunities to engagement, opportunities to engage with different perspectives? And is that a similar kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, similar. So we example of Northeast University London, and we because we are both part of a global network and a UK institution, we have something that we call core competency. It's very complicated to explain, so perhaps I can explain later on what we.
I'm familiar with core competencies, but yeah, it's similar to graduate.
But basically, we have you have to think of them almost as badges that are attached to courses that the students will be taking anyway, and the assessments, and they're basically like extra learning outcomes, and the assessments also need to meet that. And our students can only graduate if they have collected a certain amount of these core competencies. And part of that is, about societies and institutions, or about data, working with data. It might be around working with diversity or culture, being creative.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really nice, and I think it's really interesting to see that some of these pedagogies are really starting to become much more mainstream. And I think this is a really nice thing that sort of all these different universities are recognizing this similar problem, this idea of this constructive disalignment. There are things that we think university does, or things that we know university does for some people, And actually, what we can start using is we can start using assessment as our most powerful curriculum tool for engaging students and helping them actively develop this. So yeah, so some of the things that we've sort of came across in these, particularly, how do we do this? If how do we go about developing curricula that, okay, brilliant. How do we go about developing curricula that actively develop all of these things that we think we think that universities should do, but we're not necessarily sure if they should? To what extent is it the responsibility of the student to go and do these things, because they're taking responsibility? They're independent, autonomous, challenge, all of those kinds of things. And to what extent is it the responsibility of the staff to create an environment where the challenge is appropriate? And again, that becomes a significant source of division. And one of the sort of the things that's been really beneficial from this is getting teams in a room to agree what it is that the course is going to do. Yeah, so that everybody's on board and say, okay, well, maybe we feel that we can't do some of these things, and we're just going to be open and honest about that and focus on the things that we can do well, because we believe that that will prepare students for for the future in the best way we can. Again, really interesting different perspectives on this from subjects aligned to like a known vocation, a known endpoint. And so something myself from biology, what the purpose of biology is biology courses has been like part of national discourse for over 15 years. And I still don't think we're any closer to a resolution on that. So these ideas, okay, well, we produce biologists, but why does anyone care about biology? But what's the value to the student about being trained as a biologist? Because it can't just be go and do biology research, because that only fits like 6% of the entire biology graduating cohort. So we should probably design a course that does something for the other 94%. That seems fair. But similarly, so if we have a known endpoint, so if we say, oh, we know that the endpoint is dentistry, well, what happens to a student that doesn't go on to become a dentist? It's a much smaller proportion, but if the only purpose of the course is to prepare students for that, why is it a degree? Why is it not a training course? What is the value of it being higher education? What's the value of the autonomy, the ownership, the academic, the disciplinary engagement? And I think there's been some really interesting conversations about that. We won't have time for that, but I'm happy to discuss that with people. This was the second workshop. I think we'll probably skip through. But if anyone wants to talk about what makes good assessment, then I'm happy to talk about that at another point. Our end point here is that we think that many courses, many institutions have struggled with this concept of constructive disalignment, where what the course is designed to do is not the same as what students think it's going to do, what society thinks higher education does, and what employers want it to do. And those are all quite slightly different things. And it's basically impossible for a university course to do all of those things for every student. So as a community, as a teaching program, we need to sit down, have a conversation, to say, well, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to develop in our students? And then how are we going to get the students to evidence that they have done that? So the process that we've sort of built for this, from this, so yeah, here we go. Some people may be familiar with misalignment. So misalignment is the more common term, this idea that we know what the endpoint is, but actually the learning and the pedagogy and the assessment aren't actually designed to do that. But we think this idea is broader about, well, actually, what is it that we're aligning to? What is it that all of these things, all of this time, this effort, this teaching, this assessment, this independent learning, what is it that we're trying to inculcate in our students? So we've developed this idea called the competence-based assessment framework, and it's based on two ideas. The first one is about engaging with external stakeholders, saying, well, what is it that students are trying to get out of this? And this idea about, we think that the purpose of the course is to develop and enhance student aspirational futures. So to help students aware of what it is that they could be doing and how to get it. So they may have, so my students, they have this aspiration. They know that they want to help protect biodiversity on the planet. They know that that's what they want to do. They want to in some way be involved in wildlife protection and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's actually a really, really broad remit for us to work within. Say, well, we could send them into fundraising, communications, policy, all of this kind of stuff. So let's think about what a course looks like that does that, because that's what they want. And in order to do that effectively, we need to go and engage with the people who work in those environments. You know, we need to go and engage people who have the lived experience of the environments that we want to send our students into. And I'm aware I'm probably slightly preaching to the converted here, because I understand that that's broadly what the purpose of iLead is, and it's fantastic to see the mainstreaming of these kinds of ideas in higher education, something that I think has been quite a fringe perspective for far too long. So if anyone has any really interesting assessments that they think align with some of these ideas and can help address constructive disalignment, then we'd really like to invite them to come and speak to us about it at our conference in August. It's online, it's free, and you can register for it using the QR code.
1 minute for Q&A.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting, very engaging. Thank you for all your work. Did you consider like the optionality in assessment? Because you're talking about environment, but we also have to create safe environments for students, and especially after the Bristol case. And this is the thing. For example, I was really like militant of optionality, and people were saying no. And then after the Bristol case, people are like contacting me and say, "Oh, can you talk about optionality?" And I do believe, as being a student myself, that I would like, in my time, probably I would have seen more like taking about like independent learning and taking the approach that I want in the assessment, rather than being like people dictating to me. And with the Gen Z, I did quite a lot of work on Gen Z, and they're a completely different ball game, because they're really rebel. They have different, like, you know, they have different way of thinking, etc. Did you take all this into consideration? Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the optionality or student ownership of assessment is something that's really interesting and really important right now. And I think one of the challenges for me with student ownership and optionality is around generative AI and integrity. So like, I'll pull on my specific example within my discipline. So originally I used to be able to let students pick any ecosystem and then write a policy brief on that ecosystem about how best to conserve it going forward. But one of the things that I found within that is, in order to assess that effectively, I needed to know the literature and I needed to know the subject really well in order to ensure that the academic integrity was underpinning that. So I've had to scale that back. I think particularly as well, one of the advantages for competence-based assessment is that we can really focus on learning outcomes and say, okay, the student needs to be able to do this, but they can have ownership of how they evidence that. The logical conclusion of this is, if we say we want students to be able to communicate with a diverse audience, that doesn't mean they have to stand up in front of, if we particularly think about the Bristol case, that doesn't mean they have to stand up in front of a group of people and speak live and answer questions. Those aren't the same things. So what we do is we have this concept of the sliding scale of challenge. So we discuss with students and we say, this is the traditional way that the assessment happens. However, there is a sliding scale of challenge. So if you feel comfortable to stand up and talk to a group of people, that's great. That's probably going to be a really helpful skill set going forward. That's absolutely fine. But if that's not achievable for you, if that's not even close to being achievable for you, then making students do that isn't going to build their self-efficacy. It's not going to build their confidence. It's going to destroy it. So we go, okay, what's the sliding scale? The purpose of the assessment is to show that they can communicate with a diverse audience. So maybe that's pre-recording a video. Maybe that's doing a talk with a smaller group of people. And I think that the key point here is we go at the individual level, what's the level of challenge that you can manage now? And how can we make sure that by the time you graduate, you've become more competent? So, maybe the student starts off with that recorded video, but then maybe by the end of the course, they're able to talk in a room live like 2 lecturers. That's progress.
And you know, I think sometimes we lose that by saying, well, no, this is, you know, this is the assessment and this is the only way you can evidence that learning outcome or outcome. Yeah, we've got time for another question. Okay, brilliant.
Thank you very much for the voting presentation. You surveyed 120 academics.
Yes, yeah,
For that research.
yeah, that one.
Do you think are we planning to survey students?
Yeah. So part of the milestones for the project that we have to deliver is some surveys for students. If anyone would like to help us survey the students, then they'd be more than welcome to get in contact. Because we have done some initial ones for the students, but not enough such that I can really sort of say whether they're clear differences or not. But yeah, that's sort of the next stage of this, is to take the student data and provide that comparison, because we think that actually they're a lot more similar than we think they are, because we often forget that students aren't this like unified mass of just like one purpose and one identity, and that's what makes higher education so challenging, is like, well, how do we help every student flourish when they've come from all of these different places and they want all these different things? But yeah, so I think there's still going to be that sort of divergence in student population, but I'd be really happy for people to contact us and we can send you a QSOR across. So yeah, that'd be great. Shall we let the next one get on? Thank you very much, guys.
Yes.
Because the door and the screen make it angle. That's the reason we put it here. Yes. Okay.
So, hi everyone, thank you for being here. I'm Zeenat and this is Sophie. So I'm a lecturer in maths education at King's Foundation here. And Sophie is my research assistant on that project. She's a master's student here at King's in the Institute of Psychology, Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience. So I'm going to talk about the SHARP assessment cycle, and Sophie will talk a bit about the data analysis. So this project, wait, let me see, I'll do it, yeah, okay. So this project is looking at how we actually going to design assessments, but in taking into account student feedback at the same time. It's more of a real-time feedback that we are using here in designing the assessment. So you're familiar with the fact that when there's an assessment, what we do is we mark it and then we give back the feedback to students, and they take it, they take on board what you say, and then they're leaving the year and they go into the next level. So they finish their first year, they went to do the second year of their studies. So in here, what we are trying to do is, what I've been trying to do is design the assessments during the academic year. So if we have a couple of, in my module, we have like three tests that students do. So there is like this kind of like test 1, and then there's test 2, and then there's test 3, for instance. So what we do is based on test 1, test 1 is conducted. So what we do is we try to implement student feedback into our next assessment. So that's where the cycle comes in, where we try to resolve this problem where a student is getting the feedback a bit too late, and then they can't do anything about it. They say, oh, what's the point of me giving feedback then on the whole module, because at the end of the day, I'm not benefiting from it. So in this case, with this SHARP assessment cycle, students are able to see that what they're saying are being implemented or being acted upon, and they can see it happening actually. So that's what we observe over the cycle of assessments. So I'm just going to talk about what is SHARP and the pilot that I've done with my module, and then see how SHARP works in reality. I think very different. Okay, so it's yeah. So as I said here, the assessment cycle is based a bit on student feedback literacy, but it was hard for me to see if anything really theoretical exist around what I was trying to do, introduce that real-time feedback of input of students into those assessments. So I could relate it a bit with Carlos and Boud feedback literacy concept, where they talk about students receiving the feedback, they assess what they have, what they've got, they manage their emotions from what they get, and then they try to act on it. So in my case here, what we're trying to do is we're going to get student feedback, and then we're going to try to use it to design those assessments in a better way. So what I've seen is that in the workplace now, what we're trying to do is use real-time feedback to provide to build this kind of rapport with the employees. So that's what we're trying to do here as well in the education area here. So what SHARP does is, as I said, will embed student voice at every stage of the assessment, allows real-time adjustment based on those student feedback, but also like we are trying to co-create assessments with those students. Yeah, so when they sit for one assessment, we will then use what they say and improve on the next assessment. And if there is a third one, we're going to do that over again. So that goes on as a cycle. What I have done here is piloted in my module, which is Maths for Social Science. We have, as I said, there we have 3 in-class tests, but I have also piloted the SHARP assessment cycle in the economics module, where they have report writing, so the group report, and an individual report analysis as well. So we've tried to implement that in a different kind of setting as well, not necessarily a test where there are several tests, but also with respect to could be coursework, yeah, essay writing, for instance. So SHARP can actually be adapted to different assessment types. So how does the SHARP do? It was supposed to be like, you know, a bit more animated. So I couldn't, in terms of what SHARP does, so SHARP basically means a strategic, holistic, adaptive, reflective process. So in terms of the strategic part, what we're going to do is we're going to use prior student feedback. So let's say there's the first assessment happening. So we're going to, we haven't surveyed students, our current cohort yet. So we're going to use prior feedback into our first assessment. So we take on board what has been said before and apply make changes to the assessment. But at the same time, the strategic phase also include anything that is going on in the educational landscape. So in that case, we have AI going about. So if SHARP was there a couple of years ago, maybe that's what you could have used. When you are designing your assessment, you sit down, you look at the strategic phase, and you ask yourself, okay, so now there is AI. How am I going to use AI in my assessment? So how am I going to allow freedom with the use of AI, limitation, no use, etc. So at that stage, you sit down and you think about this particular development in the educational landscape. So it can be adapted to any other things that can happen. We don't know, something else can happen. Like when there was a COVID, we were on campus and then move online. So that's that strategic phase where you're going to sit and review the whole process. Then we have the holistic phase where we look at our student cohort and think in terms of accessibility, in terms of student workload, in terms of, it could be student workload in terms of assessment or over their whole program, so that would be that holistic aspect of it. Adaptive, this is where it's that most important part of the cycle. Adaptive in the sense that we are using that real-time student input in the assessment. So I'm going to talk about how it applies in my module, actually, so get a better understanding. So when we get that student input, then what we, as educators, we're going to make those realistic adjustments. Now, one thing is for the holistic part, what's important is the making sure that also this is where you're going to look at whether your assessment are fitting or meeting those learning outcomes. Yeah. And then adaptive, I already talked about. Reflective, so now one assignment is done. What you're going to do as educators, but as a student as well, you're going to think about how was the assessment experience, how was it? From the student perspective, they're going to think about what improvement they're going to do, what went well, what didn't go well. And while for the educators, what we're going to think about is our changes, have this happened, were they effective or not? So that's going to be at the reflective end. And then the process, it's basically what happens afterwards is what you have designed, what students have said, we are going to basically what we talk about feedback, closing the feedback loop. So we're going to tell students, like, for instance, what they've said, what changes we have made, what we have acted on, and what we couldn't change as well, because sometimes assessment briefs, as you know, are already being set. So there's not much of flexibility in changing assignment briefs, for instance. All right, well, so sample, we have 3 in-class tests for the Maths for Social Science. I've got a lot of data, so it's very new. I've got my data now and I'm doing all the analysis. It's still like at the exploratory phase. There's so much data to analyze. So I'm going to talk about only on the class tests that have been done. And that class test was online before. Last year, a few years ago. Now it is fully on campus. But what is important in this sharp assessment cycle is that you have to have the module leader on board. Yeah, so because there's a lot of like communication going on and reviewing, adapting, analyzing, etc. all these assessments. Yeah, so in terms, yeah, it was supposed to be like, anyway, so sharp in action in terms of the strategic phase, therefore. So the strategic phase here, as I said, for my test, starting with test 1, what we had to do, what I had to think about is it was an online test, so moving on campus. What does that imply? Not necessarily only paper-wise, question types, but also the setting, like logistics. Yeah, so in terms of spacing, in terms of timing, because it's a big cohort, we don't have enough space. So which means our tests were over 5 days. So how did we have to keep to that academic integrity, for instance? So there are all these kind of strategic issues that we had to think of in the strategic phase. In the holistic phase, so what we did was after test 1, we looked at for instance, an example in test 1 was that all the topics in the assessment enough? Is it too much? Should we reduce the number of topics? Because the topics might be too heavy. So that is something that came out in that kind of phase when we talk about that. It's a student workload, but with respect to the assessment. It could be within the student academic year as well. Yeah, so that was basically on the assessment. So we looked at the fairness, timing of the paper. Was it enough or should we adjust it? So that came into the holistic side when one assessment happened. But this cycle also was done after all the 3 assessments were done. So that's why it's a cycle. It goes on over like a loop all the time. So one assessment is done and then second one and third one. And then the adaptive phase, as I said, listening to students, they hear what they say and they see what has been implemented. So for instance, for test 1, they were saying there was not enough space in the question paper. Yeah, that's something else because the paper was online before and it became on campus. We use GradeScope. Some of you might have heard about this or used it. So the paper is set in a certain way. So students have some space. So not enough space, we gave them space in test 2. They still said not enough space in test 2. We gave them more space in test 3. You see, so that's one example that we did in terms of adaptation. So students did feel that their voice was being heard because some students did say, oh, it was great to have more space, you know. So that's the idea of using student. We have quite a few examples like that where students were very appreciative of changes we have made and they could see what were done. And then in terms of the reflective phase, so example, students' reflection part would be, did I do well? What I didn't do well? What could I do? And what was important here is they were able to use their peers' revision strategies, which we provided with them, we circulated with them, explained to them what students were doing. And would that be something, a revision strategy you will also use for yourself? So I was in the reflective and then the process. So basically what we did was we at the end of all the analysis, I just wrote a flyer circulating to all the students what they said, what was acted on, what couldn't be acted on, basically. So students knew what changes were made. It was not as of from in hindsight, basically something that comes out as well is that some students still didn't understand what changes were made. So that's something that we're going to be looking into for the next time. So that's basically how the shop assessment cycle works. So I leave it to Sophie now to just talk a bit about the main findings there. So
yeah, so we, as Zeenat said, we analyzed a bunch of different survey responses. We had our pre-results survey responses, which came from students' initial impressions of the test, and then we also had our post-results survey responses, which came from students, more of their reflection on how they thought the test went, as well as their reflections on the grade feedback that we used. So these were some of the main themes that we found. Something that we really focused on was fairness, asking students if they thought test 3 and test 2 were more fair than test 2 and test 1. And as you can see, from test 1 to test 2, we had quite a big improvement. And then again, it stayed pretty steady in test 3 at 91% of students finding that the tests were fair, regardless of their learning and their background. And this really indicated to us that using this student feedback really helped for students to help students notice like an impact on their perceived fairness. And then another big theme that we found was inclusivity. And we were asking students if they were encountering any language or any terminology that was maybe unclear or they just didn't understand. And as you can see, this also decreased, so the clarity was getting better with each test using the student feedback. And it's important to note here, it wasn't the tests overall that were confusing the language. It was more typically a specific word. So for example, in test 3, the word saturation came up for multiple different students. And this was really helpful for students because we want to like take down any of those potential barriers and make sure the assessments are as accessible as possible for all of the students. And then another really big theme that we found was transparency. So this was more to do with like the grade feedback that they were receiving on the platform Gradescope, just like we just said. And as you can see, again, increase started pretty middling at 57%, and then it rose 73%, and then finally up to 91%. And obviously these improvements are critical for students to understand like what their grades were, why they received it, and how they can improve in the future. But it's also really important for staff to get this feedback to help like, improve the communication with students, enhance like the staff-student relationship, and also a big part of the SHARPS assessment cycle is the reflective practice, which is really important in this. And then kind of our overarching theme was all about student voice. So we asked students how well they thought that their feedback was considered in designing the test. So as you can see, for test 2 and test 3, pretty high ratings of 4.2 for test 2 and 4.13 for test 3. And we also asked students if they felt more involved in designing the test. And in test 2, we had 89% of students indicating that they felt at least somewhat involved. And then for test 3, 100% of students indicating that they felt at least somewhat involved. And this felt like quite a powerful change in not just the assessments, but also in how students felt that their voices were heard, which was really important. And we also asked students if they wanted feedback to be continued to be asked for. And this was not just for their cohort, but also future cohorts. And we found that all the students that responded to the survey said that they would want feedback to be continued, which was really great. Yeah, and then this is just some of the more open-ended responses that we got as well. So like I was just speaking about, asking for similar feedback in the future to other math or social science students. So we've got yes, so you can know what works best for students. Yes, to improve every year. Yes, it seems helpful. And it's nice to feel listened to, even if it is a placebo. I thought this one was really important because it's just having students knowing that their voice is like the act of students having their voice heard alone was really important in terms of like their sense of belonging and also like their sense of engagement with the surveys and the course. Got a lot of other ones as well. So we also wanted to understand how students thought their feedback was considered in the design. So students spoke a lot about test 2 being really well designed. As you can see, it was well constructed like test 2. I gave great feedback for test 2, which made test 3 similar. Test 3 question types were not so different, and most of my classmates were satisfied with test 2's format. And then also something that we thought was really important was small things like the bold text was great. So things like this were not things that we would have ever thought about in the design of the assessment, making like a specific word in bold, and like using the student feedback really helped us attend to these like small details and improve the accessibility for all students. And then also you can see here we have the student grade distribution. So the bluey purple is test 1, yellow is test 2, and the green is test 3. And as you can see, there's quite a concentration of the bluey purple on the lower side for test 1, and there's quite a positive shift throughout all the tests towards higher scoring, and it just becomes more balanced with higher scores over time.
Yep. So basically here we can see that, well, the grades were much better after from test 1 moving on. So you can see an improvement in the tests. Well, there are other factors that also account for that, I'm pretty sure, but eventually what we have used this year is obviously like helping compared to previous cohorts. So hopefully the shop will continue for the next set. So in terms of the next phase, what I'm thinking, because it's a new assessment cycle that I've designed, and I've tried it for my module, which is a foundation module. So now I'm trying to see which, of course, it's going to be for sure adaptable to the higher level degrees, undergraduate or postgrad. So if anyone is interested in trying the shop in your own module, so please do contact me, because we could see that this is helping. And I've got this other survey that is coming in for the final one, which is looking at the more overall assessment experience. And I do see that students see that as a positive. The shop assessment side is really positive, and they say that it would be nice to see that in other modules as well. So that's what I want to try to disseminate now, is try to adapt this cycle. I think in terms of our first presentation as well, that also be something useful to have a proper structure in how you are designing these assessments. We as educators, we don't think in terms of the student in the student place. So I think listening to them and meaning collaborating with them, partnering with them is important. We see that here. This leads to a very positive outcome for all the students. They're very happy at the end of the day in their assessments. They have just good things to say about the assessments in the maths module. Yeah. So in terms of shop toolkit, I'm trying to
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. So I'm now working on some shop resource. So I've got a kind of a shop map to help module leaders, because I know this can be quite intensive. Might be a question from you guys, but that could be quite intense. So I'm working on a kind of a module leader map. So that's what I'm doing now, trying to make it more user-friendly, cool, fun, and easy to click and, tick checklist kind, having some links to attachment that is all relevant, etc., where everything is in one place with the assessment design. And finally, the scalability. I think this can be shop can be scaled to different assessment types. I've already looked into the group presentation, and there's a video presentation as well, when pre-recorded a presentation assessment. I think it's also scalable across different areas as well, not necessarily only maths for social science, but other maybe more hot sciences as well. So can be, and in terms of different cohort sizes, for sure. Yeah, so that's me here. So if you have any question, anything you want to just connect with me, please, that's the QR code there. And there's some questions if you're interested in knowing more about shop or just talking about it and trying to implement it for your own module. Just please contact me. Yeah, we can work together. The analysis part, don't worry, I'm there. I will help you with that. Maybe Sophie might not be with me by then, but that should be doable. I'm trying to do that in an easy way. I'm thinking about the data analysis part to make it easy for module leaders as well. I know some of you don't like to work with numbers, so I'll be here to help. Thank you. Sure, go ahead.
So I'm worried about the surveys. How many surveys are we distributing to students?
Yeah.
Because they have to, midterm survey that we do.
Yeah.
And then at the end of evaluation that they do for the module.
Yeah.
And then for the assessment, 3 of them at least, for example, my courses, they have 3 assessment too.
Oh, that's cool.
So in that case, First of all, I'm surprised at how many students you got to actually respond.
Exactly.
You can't make them more than 19% sometimes.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Yeah. So that's something that definitely was something troubling me for sure, because the thing is, in my assessment, in my module, I have 5 assessments. So I've shown only 3.
Oh.
So those students, so we are grouping to 15 groups. So I have used only 7 out of the 15, but I'm sure the others would have been interested to give their feedback. They always like that. So basically, how I did that was, well, they just fill it in. Now, yes, the thing is, what is important is to grab them very quickly. So basically I had the there was pre-survey and post-surveys. So the thing is, I took four groups for pre-surveys and 3 groups for post-surveys, because I know that there will be, it's pointless, because the pre-survey is the pre-result survey and the other one is a post-result survey. So that 2 things. How I got more like as much like 50% of responses was that after the first test was a bit hard. I think it's the first test. Students were very excited to give the feedback. So even the strategy was different. Strategic phase, you see, the strategy was different. So they I think willingly they filled it in. That was their first survey. But then the second survey was a bit harder. So what I would do is, after the test, have them sit and say, okay, we have 10 minutes, so please can you fill in the survey? And then, voluntary, of course, it's all voluntary participation. Also, so it's important to, when you see the students, that they can fill in the survey, as they're not gonna, they will, it will be a bit harder to do that.
So I'm just going to ask one more question.
Yeah.
So these assessments, 3 assessments, so you said it's a foundation mathematics,
yes,
right? So don't you think that the students, they may have responded to the feedback positively or negatively relate to how hard or difficult the assessment on its own?
Okay, so definitely there was this question, how did you feel about the test, etc., right? So so in terms of who filled the surveys, I could see that these were like the higher end of the distribution. So yeah, so even then it means that even if so that's something that we had a little bit in the 65s, right?
Yeah.
And then a bit in the higher end.
It was
a
definitely
bit
higher distribution, but we did have some people responding in that kind of more middling, like 2-1, 65 level.
Yeah, 65 plus. But remember that progression in foundation is around 65 plus, so they are ranging around that range. Yeah. So sorry, did I answer your question?
Yeah. So first of all, as I said, my concern is that that's very many survey you're distributing to 64 students, right? And then the other thing is about that actually students giving feedback on your feedback, or they are giving feedback on how difficult the questions were, or how happy they are on the exam in general.
Yeah, so in terms of the number of surveys, so what I had to do is talk with the student experience team to ask if surveys were going around. So first of all, to have the clearing out that we could send all these surveys, but also we were very clear with students what was the purpose of the survey. So I think they already understood from the first survey they filled, they could see the change. So they were willing, so because it's the same groups, right? So they would be willing to fill in the surveys as well. Of course, they had the £20 voucher. Yeah, £20 voucher. Yes. Yeah, but then but in test 2, the number of responses dropped. So I don't think maybe it's not the voucher that was helping. For 5 surveys to fill in for £20, I don't know. Maybe it's an incentive. Yeah, there have to be an incentive on that. Yes, and one more thing is in terms of difficulty level, that is from the holistic side. So even if those students were, basically one student was saying, oh, why are you doing this survey? Everybody would say, oh, this is going to be easier and easier over time if you listen to us. Some would want to have easier questions. And the fact is the level of difficulty stayed the same. Students were even saying in their surveys that they want the same level of difficulty. They didn't want to have easier ones.
That was something that came up a lot in the analysis. Students keeping the difficulty the same. Students over and over again said that, which I myself as a student, I found that surprising.
Yeah, that was surprising, but very, very good to hear. So basically the question types were made simpler. They could see that, but at the same time it was like challenging at the same time, but in a balanced way. So students felt that they didn't feel that the paper was not easy still. and you could see in terms of the especially the upper level students, the performance, they were kind of like flat. They were not like, so if they were getting 90s in test 1, they were getting 90s in test 3 in the exam. So there was no big of like volatility in terms of this kind of range of grades. Yeah, in terms of helping them out to fill in the survey, I think it's just like having that rapport with students and telling them what we've been doing. They see it and they're just going to do it for themselves. And the fact is, I ask, sorry guys, I'm just going to, in my last survey, I asked them, what can I do to give them more incentive to fill surveys? So I've got that I have to sit down and review, and I'm excited to see what they're saying, because for sure there is something that we can do better there. Yes.
Yes, just a quick question. You talked a bit about there's some questions regarding fairness.
Yes.
It's like it's very subjective when we talk about fairness, especially when we ask students.
Yeah.
And you talked like when you were just answering, you said something like about training the students or talking to students. Did you do like intensive training to them to explain like questions by questions? Because if I tell people fairness, you can tell me, oh, it wasn't fair because I didn't like that. For example, topic is, for example, the topic in mathematics that I really don't like.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's just like, it's very hard to, I don't know, it's very hard to quantify or to have the perception of fairness. How did you address that? Because it's like philosophical in a way.
Yeah. So that is something, okay, I'm not very linguistic kind of person. I'm more mathematical in that sense. So in terms of that fairness term, it came out with the theme that I thought I was connecting fairness with in terms of the timing of the paper, in terms of the different learning abilities of the group, different background where they come from, mathematical skills. That they're not yet, because this is I'm just starting to do this. This is a new. So it was in terms of how did you find the paper fair in terms of irrespective of your background and learning abilities. So that was where the students were thinking in terms of answering the question. So there is something to, of course, the fairness in the mathematical sense. That's something to look into for sure.
The learning abilities, when we ask students at foundation, how we can actually assess our learning abilities at that early stage, because they're not master students.
Yeah.
It's a bit like.
So in terms of, I guess, the fairness, because it's the term I've taken out from the main theme that I'm taking it out in terms of timing, in terms of language, in terms of how students in terms of thinking, in terms of the whole diverse background of students in that sense. I think we had one.
Yeah, there's no time.
No time.
Okay. During the topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Now we got generative AI. I'm going to be slow there. Lost running here. So this is work that we'll be talking about, which is literally hot off the presses. What this work is it's sponsored by the Stone Center on Inequalities, and it's supported by the Royal Economic Society. Can we say commissioned by the Royal Economic Society? Absolutely. And you can see there's a bunch of people from, I forgot to put all their institutions, but across the UK, including Denise Hawkes from King's, who's over there. So ask her all the hard questions, basically. So what we did was, we are all economists. Some of us are in business schools, others are in departments of economics. What we did was try to bring together some of the conversations we were having across the sector, and this is not just in the UK, but in the US as well, about the way we assess within economics, what it means in a Gen AI enabled world. We were trying to get to some answers, but we would have been happy with some questions sort of surface to find answers to. So what we did was we ran 2 surveys, one for academics, one for employers, because what we were definitely trying to do was to answer some of the questions that you asked as well, about what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to do with these students? Where are we trying to get them to? And then kind of back out of there, how do we assess that we are actually in fact getting them there?
there's kind of a background to this, I guess, as well, that in many cases, in many universities, economics is one of the subjects that brings in all the students, brings out all the money, if we want to express about it. It's the credibility of our degrees, the demand for our degrees is something that no one wants to mess with, I think. The final thing I'll say here before jumping in is we talked to a lot of employers. So we had an employer survey, and what we'll report on are the results of both those surveys, but also a workshop we had with, again, educators and employers. This was just last Tuesday, which is why I'm saying it's hot off the presses. So Denise, you'll see some new things in here as well. What we were trying to do is to encompass all the different areas that our students would go to. But while this is kind of supported by the Royal Economic Society, the areas that our students are going to are the areas that anyone else is going to. So we had employer representatives from finance, consultancy, government, these kind of the areas that most people go into, I think. So I am going to start with a little bit of scene setting, and then hand over to Rowan, who's going to talk about the employer survey and workshop. And I'm going to come back and talk about the educator and some key takeaways. So this will be new to you, Denise. This is something I mocked up last night, and I'm not the most visual person in the research team, so this is probably going to change. I'm working on this. But this was essentially what we were trying to address. So on the at the top there, and it's not at the top because it's most important, but one of the key things we wanted to think about was employability. I feel like we need to come up with a better word. So we put futures there as well, and that's in quotation marks because those of you who were involved with the last step might have remembered that OLF has asked us to come up with a definition of educational gains. And we did this exercise at UCL with our students, and the word that kept coming up was futures. It was not careers, it wasn't jobs, it was futures, all the things that they will be doing. So that's what we're trying to kind of capture there. Are we preparing them for this world that they're going into, whatever they will be doing out there? So we're trying to do that. We're trying to do that in a way that is inclusive and equitable, and at the same time maintains the academic integrity. And I was at a conference here, actually, in Bush House, the King's conference yesterday. I don't know if some of you were there. And there was a question around, are these things in conflict? And I would argue that they're not, and we can talk a little bit more about that. One of my, so I'm professor of economics at UCL, but one of my other roles is vice provost education, and I look after all of the tech stuff, so student outcomes and everything. And I keep thinking that for our students who are coming from backgrounds that are not necessarily always represented in universities, making a sacrifice, both in terms of actual costs, but also opportunity costs to come here, giving them a piece of paper that's not worth anything, that's a luxury that other people might be able to do. It is something that we need to take very seriously. People are putting their money, their time into our degrees. We need to make sure we're giving them something that's valuable. How we define valuable, that we can discuss, and then depend on students and so on, but I don't think it's negotiable. In the background of all of this is, of course, Gen AI. What we're going to see, I think, in some of the discussions that we have is that Gen AI is a great lens and new way to talk about some of the things that we've been talking about for a long time already. So it's not really that new. So I hand over to Ramin now. It's going to take us through the employer.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm going to focus on is actually this bit of the story. Let's see how the professional economists are using AI and what are the future skills that we need to give to our graduates. So excuse the self-centeredness. So the question is about how professional economists are actually using AI at work. We were lucky that 114 people responded to our survey, and all of them are essentially people with economics or finance degrees who are now working in industry. Let me tell you a little bit about the characteristic of the respondents. So most of them were based in the UK. In terms of sectors, that were coming from academia and higher education, public sector and consultancy. The majority of them had less than 3 years of work experience, and most of them were men. So not a representative sample. So we wanted to find out, we asked them, how do you use AI in your work? And we gave them a set of categories, right? A wide set of tasks. Have a look at these tasks. They range from very analytically narrow tasks, like you ask your AI tool about a specific command and how to run a regression in Stata or Excel. Very narrow, all the way to a very broad, analytically broad task. Like you ask your AI, brainstorm with your AI tools on how to run a workshop, how to run a survey. So as you go from left to the right, the tasks become much broader, less defined, or thinking about it in this way, as you go from left to right, if you would like the AI tool to do these things, you need to interact more with the AI tool, then it becomes more of a conversation, back and forth, back and forth. So we gave them these categories, and this is what they responded. A very good spread, right? A lot of responses here, narrow tasks, but, very good. Drafting, writing consensus. We're talking about, doing the literature review, writing an abstract, writing a LinkedIn post, all the way to doing brainstorming. So, of course, this is not surprising with economists. All of us use AI in wide variety of ways, but perhaps the more important question is that what is the most important use of AI? What is the most important? So this was our next question. What is the most important use of AI? But this time, we didn't give them any categories. We didn't want to impose our analytic categories on the respondents. So we kept this open-ended. We wanted the respondents to tell their stories to us. So we got an open-ended textual analysis. We got these responses. Obviously, we had to extract themes from them, right? I will gonna show you the themes for a moment. Ta-da! Again, a wide variety. So I can read your mind. You would have guessed everybody's gonna set code, right? But this is the interesting thing, the story of AI for economists is not just about using it for narrow tasks. It's not just about using it for coding or programming. A lot of economists are using it for drafting, writing documents, like writing a report or abstract or an email. That's the most important use, all the way to brainstorming. I was very surprised with this one, right? I was very surprised. So again, the story is that the use of AI is much broader than we think, right? So this is really the story. My one takeaway note, I'll have two more others and I'll finish and hand over to Parama. So my first takeaway note is that economists, like many professions, I don't think it's just about economists, are using AI in these three ways. Both like a calculator, you ask a very specific thing, as a research assistant, executive assistant, or a comms manager when you are writing a LinkedIn post, right? Doing a literature review. You have to, the task is kind of defined, but you need to go back and forth. Like it's talking to a person, all the way to using AI as an intellectual peer, as a problem solver. So that's takeaway note one. Takeaway note two, the most important thing, what do you think the future skills? What are the most important employability skills for the new graduates, for future graduates, right? Any guesses there? Any guess? Ability to use AI, interesting.
Prompting.
Prompting, yes.
Tasks, decorticated tasks, much easier way.
Sorry?
Decorticating their tasks.
Like prompting? What else?
The ability to navigate the employment sector, like navigate the office and to navigate how to find jobs and get jobs. And
CV, career readiness, CV, things like that, job description.
This is the interesting bit. Again, very wide. It starts from very specific, very narrow skills like coding and programming. critical thinking and evaluation, right? Know the limits of AI. This is very interesting. Know when to use AI and when not to use AI, and research skills. Let me give you some quotes. Was an open-ended question, right? Know how to use AI as an assistant tool without excessively relying on that. Still be able to double check, have a critical attitude on the outcome proposed. So this quote speaks to critical thinking and evaluation and know the limits of AI. How do you know the limits of AI? Probably you have to have a good research skills, right? So this is when we come next. Ability to figure out how to solve problems themselves, especially related to data and model, right? So takeaway 2, right? You need these skills. Can I have 2 more minutes and short? So let me just jump into something else, very kind of shifted gears. People's challenges and concerns. So bear with me. Okay. What challenges do you or your colleagues face when using AI in workplace? Again, I don't think specific to economists. So quality assurance, let me give you some quotes. Hallucination and inaccurate information. Right. This is really interesting. Read the quote. So this feel of alienation, you start relying on AI more and more. You treat it as an Abrahamic God, omnipotent God, right? You lose your sense of agency. Access, this is really interesting. And then more access, right? So let me go back, take away notes, and then I hand over to my colleague, right? What is, so what? So what? Right. So the very first thing is, this is the first takeaway note. Economists are using AI in a very broad way, but so what of all this is this one. One thing we need to teach them: critical evaluation, research skills, collaboration, communication, and ethical responsibility, and ethical use of AI. So that was the view from the workplace.
All right, so I'm going to take you through our educators survey. So the QR code is there. There's lots of information in that survey. I'm just going to highlight a couple of interesting things, and this shows you the themes that we used in the survey as well. So first thing to note is that, unsurprisingly perhaps, UK colleagues are better informed about whether there is an AI policy in your university or not. Perhaps because we are very heavily regulated, we know the regulations, or whether there is one, even if we don't know what the regulation is. Non-UK was largely US, and either institutions don't really have clear policies, which is a thing, or people have absolutely no idea, which I feel like is almost equivalent, because if you have a policy and no one knows it, you're not going to follow it, right? So who knows what that policy is doing? Then we asked them, does your university do any of these things? And I appreciate this is really small, so it starts with allows but does not encourage use of AI, allows and encourages, does not allow, depends on instructor or module, I don't know, no clear policy or ambiguous. And the biggest one there is allows but does not encourage. What came, so this was the survey, but what came out of our workshop with educators was absolute alarm at the sort of level of this, and many people in the workshop said we see exactly this, because this has hidden curriculum all over this. What does that mean? Allowed but not encouraged? And there were very few universities, and we had representatives across the UK who could say there is actually clear guidance for staff and students as to whatever that means, which was a little bit alarming. Then we asked folks how assessments have changed to address Gen AI or anything, really. The world is changing. How have assessments changed? And the big thing here is that in the US in particular, this is not in the UK, sorry, designing around AI weaknesses seems to be much more than anything else. So kind of almost a negative kind of a thing. And this was something that was alarming to us as well, because AI weakness today will be resolved tomorrow. So, hopefully you're changing on the fly as the technology is improving, otherwise pretty much screwed, right? There was much more, technical term, return to in-person assessment in the UK, which I think we all know about. But there was kind of a mix of other things happening as well. And I think it was interesting because I think there was a feeling that people were only now starting to think about these things, which again is a little bit alarming that first ChatGPT came out in November 22. So it's been more than 2 years. We're going into the third academic year, right? So if we're just now thinking, I mean, universities are slow, we all know that, but it's still slow, right? But this might be a takeaway from here as well, that if we are focusing on people's futures, those may be moving much faster than universities do. So we need to come up with something. I'm just bringing up the alarming questions here, by the way. Plagiarism / other detection tools. It was quite crazy. The greens down here are the yeses. How much people rely on these. And, given the very mixed evidence of how they work and whether they work and whether they're equitable and so on, it was a little bit alarming to see. Many of you will have seen the Guardian article that came out last week, I think, which was the data was through an FOI on academic misconduct cases. And universities had reported on catching students abusing AI. I don't even know what that means. How are you catching them? Is it accurate? What is happening? So all kinds of concerns, but also there were lots of universities who said, we don't actually consider abuse of AI as an academic misconduct special case. So again, not starting to think about some of these things, I think. So I'm going to end with a few of the takeaways from the surveys and the workshops that we had. One of the biggest things that kept coming back, so this is not just from the academics, but from the employers as well, who will be hiring our graduates, assessment is one of the main levers that we have, and one of the main things that we can sort of align everything else that we do around. I feel like I have to quote your work on this as well. Yes, teaching and learning and all of that, but the assessment bit is something that we can use to sort of leverage everything else. There's a lot of discussion happening around assessment design reform and how to approach security of those assessments or academic integrity, including two-lane approach, there's stoplight approaches, there's a few different things happening there. Diversified assessment is a thing as well, but if we're thinking about inclusivity, we have to think about those as well. Cognitive loads of many different types of things that you have to learn to do newly every time. That's a bit of a thing. You need support around that. But then the most important takeaway for us was to stay connected with our students' futures. Why are we doing this? Who are we preparing and for what? Second one is designed for integrity and not detection. This very much came from Denise's opening sort of remarks as well. Fears around academic integrity are not new. Is there a way we can use this to actually think more carefully about assessment rather than to panic and have sort of knee-jerk reactions? And of course, we know that there's all kinds of issues with detection kind of things, not just the current tools, but other things as well. So it's not even clear whether you can catch people, and if you can catch people, you've got the people that you want to catch. So why even go there? There are no borders to this problem, and the reason why I said that this is under the auspices of the Royal Economic Society, but the job market is global. I mean, our students go anywhere, right? So there are really no borders, but no one size fits all as well. So institutional policies are, you will need institution-specific rules, but they will need to be based on a broader framework. The Russell Group, for example, developed principles for AI use. I think it was more than 2 years ago now. I think it might be time to re-look at these and see whether they work. And they have to span disciplines and geographies. But again, with my central sort of leadership role on, I feel like we can maybe do more focusing on the disciplines and then bringing things together. So the Royal Economic Society is doing way more work than some of the universities are doing, for example. And then, of course, all of this for both staff and students. Let's remember that staff are often in the same exact position as students in terms of understanding what these things are, what to do about it. Final one for me is all of this requires work, it requires resource. And this is what we kept hearing from educators. All fine. When am I going to do this rethink of my assessment? Gen AI can help here. So if we have very clear usage sort of frameworks around what you can and cannot do, obviously don't put your students' work into machines. Hopefully people understand data protection better in this country than they do in some other places. But there's a lot of stuff that we can take out, the non-fun stuff we can take out using some of these tools, so we can actually focus on the fun stuff and the human value that I talked about. Then I end there. That's our website. There will be a report coming out from the Royal Economic Society, which I'm sure Denise will share. And our next steps are to work with the European Economic Association and the American Economic Association. So we're sweeping up as many economists around the world as we can to extend the employer survey so we can understand this more. But the focus will very much be about the futures that our students go into and then backing out the assessment from there.
Change. An example of that, prompting, many people think that prompting will not necessarily be a skill that is needed in a few months' time because AI are becoming more and more better at understanding what the users want. So when do you think we need to do another survey to look at how things are changing? The other thing is, you talked about assessment design reform. Do you think we need to look at the higher level, something to do with learning outcomes reform? Bloom's taxonomy, QAI standards, like some of the level 4 verbs, synthesizing something, summarizing something. Gen AI can do it now. So is there a need to reform this and then look at assessment, or can we just look at assessment?
Great questions. For the first one, I think this thing is moving so fast, and I think in general, the world is moving fast and things changing, that we need a very different approach. It's not going to be, you can run surveys at different frequencies. I'm not sure that's going to solve the problem. Something like, I know Bath, for example, uses employer boards quite heavily. So they are part of a continuous discussion about what's happening. And it's not just employees, it's whatever, whoever you think it is relevant to your students. And I think we need to have that going. Academic surveys are probably easier to rerun because, like I said, slow moving. So not much is going to change very soon. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just add one thing on the first one. In terms of, there's kind of few things that always come up in employer surveys. Like technical stuff, teach programming is, which we never listened to, right? And then critical thinking and evaluation and research skills that, always come up. So the matter is how to teach students in this new Gen AI, critical thinking.
I think one of the most interesting things in our discussions was a very senior member of the civil service said, I'm not sure whether my job will exist in a few years. So yeah, lots of answers. Yeah.
So on from that question, do you think that employers and sort of future idea of what critical thinking is, do you think that's the same as what we do in the course, or do you think that there's some alignment in between what we actually need students to do and what they'll be doing? Like, have you seen that really clear alignment between what educators think critical thinking is and what employers think?
Interesting. I need to think about that. Good thing. Thank you. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think there probably is a gap. I think it varies from university to university. I think, where there are more academic focused degrees, the gap is bigger probably. And I mean, I have my colleagues, the vast majority of my colleagues think everyone goes into research, like you were saying as well. It's like not even a tiny fraction. So so that's not a new thing. That's an ever sort of present thing. But it's more important now. Yeah.
So just one more question.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Oh, I was actually going to say, well, I was thinking, you said it. And that's actually sort of coming from a very long practitioner background and then sort of this year. I'm seeing now the outputs that we have from students and so on. I think it is actually we teach academically. I don't think even our students sometimes know what is meant by that academically, so you have to explain that sentences, you know, all of that stuff. But if you're in an employee situation, your critical thinking is very much going to be around problem solving. You know, this is an issue, this is a territory where we've got an issue. You've now got to actually define what this root problem is and how you're going to unbundle it, approach it, you know, and use research to come up with solutions. So I think that's what employers think of being able to critically think, solve their problems.
Noushin is looking at.
Thank you very much. Yes, sorry. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Okay, did you send it or you have? Okay. Does this thing do the presenter view? Yes. It does, okay. Yes. Yes. Hopefully we know how these things works here, right? So you're hoping, right? Yeah. Oh, lots of stuff. So help get to that there. Thank you. Maybe you do. Oh, shall I navigate? Yes, please do. Very bad with Windows. And then if no, that's not showing up. It is, but I just need to find it. It's really small. And I'm a bit blind, so. Oh. Okay, how do I put this into presenter view? Slides. Okay, I'll let you do the click. I'm That's it, right? No, presenter view so that I can see my notes. Is that all right? Presenter view, you can see your notes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm not sure that it does. You need your notes. I have my notes. Presenter view. How can we make it presenter view? Is it possible to do that? What do you mean? Sorry. Just so I can see my notes, just to add my little prompts. Yeah, the notes. They don't have one. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah, they don't have one. Yeah, it's going to it. And then, what does that do? I just check with my colleague. But then it comes up on that screen. So that actually, yeah, it comes up. The problem is that comes up. Let's make it that one and see how it goes. No, that's subtitles. Oh, I don't understand. Yeah, it doesn't do it in the classroom. Because it's only one screen. Usually they should have two screens. Yeah, that's the thing. It's the two screen thing that we need to find, but I don't know how to do that. I'll do it for my paper notes. Oh, okay, perfect. Well, it's good, but it'll be fine. Yeah, you'll be fine. Let's get rid of presenter view then. Yeah. There we go. Here you go. Thank you. Okay. That's right. Okay. Sorry, I didn't realise we'd be on such a weird background, but I went for the little funky kind of backgrounds. I was like, oh, this is really exciting. And I was like, let's just like, ramp up my presentation a bit with graphics. So I'm Zahra. I am a senior teaching fellow here at King's at the IPPN. And I'm basically talking about a sort of initiative I introduced into our new MSc programme. It's a program level assessment looking at an e-portfolio, and it's essentially just going through sort of my journey in its development and how kind of that went essentially. So I'm starting with me. So it's a little narcissistic, but just wanting to kind of give you a bit of an impression of why I decided on this assessment and what it kind of means to me. So I've been a statistician for 10 years. Working in animal health. I then became a secondary school teacher, teaching maths and statistics. And then I moved to King's and I brought my two worlds together and I was a statistician and also an educator. I was brought in to improve sort of statistical teaching and learning. build an executive education program based on like the research that's been developed in the department. And we sort of did a suite of sort of short courses from that. And I also then developed an MSc program based on those short courses. So I created this program, and then I also lead on that program. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm also a mentor for early researchers in education. I'm also an education lead and inclusive staff partner. So I've got lots of many facets to the roles that I do. But that's not all I am, right? So I'm also someone who is really passionate about education. I'm someone who is like really adaptable. I mean, I've generally changed jobs every 3 years since coming to King's. I haven't changed for 10 years, but generally kind of quite adaptable to different situations. I love to learn. Like, it's one of my biggest favorite things to do is to learn. And I, throughout my entire journey, for all these years, am a very avid reflective practitioner. And I believe in reflecting on my practice on a regular basis, reflecting on where I am, what I'm doing, whether it's working, whether it's not working, where the changes need to happen. And the reason I'm mentioning all of these things is our students aren't just what they do. Our students aren't just, you know, the skills that they're learning through the program that they're doing. Our students are more than that. And when they're going in front of employers, you know, the employers are also wanting to know who they are. They don't want to know just, oh, well, yeah, you can do machine learning. That's fantastic. But 40 other people can do machine learning. What helps you stand out? And what makes you different? And what are you actually contributing to the role? And things like adaptability and passion and resilience and all of these kind of things, you're not just going to get from that percentage, right? You're not going to get that I passed this module and therefore I'm showcasing all of these different skills. So this is where it came from, essentially. Sorry, I'm going through my lovely notes here, just bear with me. So what we're going to cover today is essentially what sparked my drive and my vision for creating this particular assessment, how the assessment kind of developed over time, and then where are we now and what the sort of next steps are. This is where we're starting from, sort of the vision. So a little bit about the ASHME program. So the ASHME program stands for Applied Statistical Modelling and Health Informatics. It's basically skills training in the exciting field of health data science. It's research informed and backed, and the reason I'm saying that is because essentially all the individuals that are teaching on it are doing active research within those particular topics, and heavily involved within health data research. And we're essentially trying to train graduates who will go in and transform and actually develop within this industry. So it's a very sought after skill. If I can put it into context, I was creating this program in 2018. So this is before sort of we were getting like a lot of the Gen AI stuff and things like that. So very much kind of the early stages of people looking at big data and seeing it as a consideration, both in government, but also within universities and that kind of thing. We know this industry is really fast paced. We know that our students going into this industry need to compete against many other students. And we also know that, you know, our students are going to have to be adaptable and resilient because of the nature of how fast paced this industry is, how quickly it changes, what the requirements and needs are of employers within the particular industry. So they have the technological skills. I'm trying to ensure they have all those other skills that they need to be able to succeed in their next steps and their next parts of their journey. We have a very diverse cohort for the MSc. So they come from very many different disciplines. So engineering, they might come from medicine. We've got mature students changing track completely for their careers. So they might have started as doctors and now they're wanting to move more into health data science. We have nurses, we have data analysts, we have statisticians, we have finance mathematicians. So you can imagine the broad scope of students coming into the program. We have students who are strong in programming and haven't got a clue how to write a statistical report. We've got students who are not strong in programming at all. They've never looked at R or Python or any of those kind of things. So we have students at various different levels. And for me, it's about embracing who they are and giving them all a chance to succeed throughout the program. At the time, there was the education strategy, 2017 to 2022. So I very much wanted to embed it in that strategy. So I wanted to ensure that I was sort of educating to inspire and to improve, to ensure that what we were doing in the program was research informed. And I really wanted to ensure that we were sort of helping those students transform throughout their journeys. And then there were also a number of different skills that I wanted to kind of touch upon and help students kind of develop based on the World Economic Forum. The sort of most desired skills at the time were things like curiosity, lifelong learning, emotional intelligence, creativity, leadership, resilience, and analytical thinking. So they're getting sort of analytical thinking and technological literacy, you know, from the actual course itself, but all of these other kind of aspects of skills I wanted to help them develop, or at least be able to communicate their ability to have these skills. So I created the Ashby e-portfolio. So it's a program level summative assessment. It initially started as just pass or fail. So just had to either pass it, so complete it. On the failed it, essentially the only way you fail it is if you don't do it, right? So why I made it summative is I wanted them to do it. It's very small kind of reasoning behind it. I want them to do it. I want them to engage with it. And so I made it summative. They have to do it to pass the program. Generally, I found in my other teaching that unless I give something a token mark of like 5%, they will not engage with it. And it's kind of for their benefit that they do engage, right? So that's what we did. My vision was very much around something they could share with potential supervisors or employers or PhDs. I wanted to help them build skill stories that they could then use at interviews or as part of their CVs. Build a portfolio of achievements, and they could showcase the kind of work that they're doing, and also showcase their sort of these technological skills that they're gaining on the program. So this is the kind of the broad kind of vision and the hope behind this particular kind of concept. For me, the pedagogic underpinning for me was all about reflection. Mostly because reflection has been such a major part in my life, I wanted it to be a major part in their life. To consistently reflect on your practice, reflect on where you are, making sure that what you're doing, you're happy in doing it, right? Because I think often we've seen in the past where people get stuck in a job and they stay there for years and years and years, and they're not getting any real satisfaction out of it. They're not being challenged, they're not growing. And I want to make sure that like I'm helping students have that always at the forefront. Reflective practice is also really great for building self-awareness, helping students personally develop, help students engage with the actual experiences that they're having on the course. It's really good, like when students are reflectively writing, you know, it helps encourage students to really think about what they're doing and how it's going to take them to where they want to get to. And it's a really great way to help students increase their self-awareness and also their self-efficacy, building confidence and really helping them to see like what are their achievements and being proud of those achievements. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of my e-portfolio. We started in 2019, 2020. And as you probably realised, that's when COVID happened. We had a very small cohort of about 12 students. It was only a PG cert at the time. I started off with a seminar explaining what the portfolio was, very, very generic, very basic. Essentially, it crashed and burned. Like, no one did this. It did not happen. It was horrific. And I was just like, just scrap it. This is not happening. Moving on. So the next year, we tried again. Again, did a sort of session on the platform Mahara. So Mahara, the reason we used it is that it's embedded within the assessment system at King. So like, this is really great. They can just directly kind of submit their portfolios in the assessment structure, which is great. I did a session to kind of talk about reflective models. I built a bit of a guide for students and gave them some examples. They were generic examples at this time. And this is kind of what we got. So as you can see, we've got some advanced techniques, so some pictures appearing. I know this is very, very small, but what hopefully you'll see is that we have some nice landing page. You know, this is all about me. They had to all create a master CV. which I haven't put up here, but they all had to put them on CV. We had students using sort of a blog-like format to their reflections, other students using a much more structured approach to their reflections. And, you know, we also linked it up to our case framework. So case framework at King's is knowledge, attributes, skills, and experiences. And for every program, there is a case framework in place. And you can start that they start showcasing their kind of assessments here, and they reflect on their assessments and what they've learned, and specifically pulling out like the skills, like I've developed a methodological approach, or organizational skills. This is how I've applied things in real life. So they're really starting to think about, you know, what they're gaining from each of the different modules that they're doing. What I really liked about that first year that it came into play was I ended up having really great conversations with students. It's just one example. I used to put comments on all of their portfolios. So they would have 3 formative kind of assessment points just for feedback. 1, to make sure that they were actually doing it. 2, to make sure that they weren't missing anything that I kind of wanted them to have in there, but also for me to engage. And as you can see, like, so this particular student, they were talking about, like, I was asking them, like, what prompted you to learn Japanese and German? And then, you know, and I'm kind of sharing a bit of my experience too, to build a bit of a dialogue. Gives me a nice top tip for guitar, which unfortunately I haven't taken on board at all. I did try, but it just never happened. But it was just a really nice way of kind of connecting with students, which I otherwise don't connect with as a program lead, because I don't teach on the modules directly. This is the only space I see them in. So this is a really great way for me to see the students in much more broader ways than just what they're gaining from their modules. That was my favourite part. So general impressions from that year was basic requirements were met with the portfolios. Some used some advanced aspects for the design, but generally designs lacked a bit of creativity. There was a range of skill levels from surface level to insightful in terms of the reflective quality. So some reflective quality was quite basic. We had strong student-staff interaction in this year. It really helped me to see more about the students than I'd otherwise see. Students were requesting more structured support sessions though, so this is something they really wanted to see. And basically the overall perception from students was that it was useful for some, stressful for others, especially because we were dealing with still COVID at this time. So we move on to the next iteration. So based on this feedback, I implemented some seminars, stayed in Zahra because that seemed to be working. And these seminars are kind of built into the year. Again, gave them some much more like constructed kind of seminar on what e-portfolios are and some examples and what they needed to do, and also some examples of how to build reflections. And this is what we ended up with. Now, what you hopefully can see is much more advanced kind of techniques being used. Now, arts and humanities here at King's, the students created this kind of advanced guide to Zahra, where they showed students how to use skins and different fonts and photos. So I shared that with our students and they took it to town, essentially creating some really great graphics. You can see the fonts are different in each of these. What you can't see is like a little bit on this one, it's purple surrounding. There's basically an extra skin around their kind of reflections. And they were definitely much more creative in their approach. And their reflections were much more considered. They were much more in depth. You know, they really thought them out, and, you know, it ended up being really good. So some used advanced features, some did not. We still had some very basic ones. Reflection quality was definitely improved. No interaction with comments, and mostly because I was giving very kind of robust feedback at the sort of formative stages. I didn't really get any comments back from students. But what I could see was an improvement in the portfolio afterwards. Students requested more structured support sessions again, and again it was mixed feedback. So for some, useful, stressful for others, meaningful for some, less meaningful for others. Never got anyone happy all at the same time. So now we move on to 23-24. So this is the ASHME portfolio plus the ASHME seminar series. And essentially this was built into the timetable. Every Monday afternoon, there was a seminar on something or the other, okay? And what we did is we created a new marking scheme. So it pushed us away from marks of pass or fail and gave us a sort of competency framework around what they were achieving. I'm going to show you that now. So here you can see that we start at beginner level and we finish at exemplary. This changes again, by the way, for next year. But so started this sort of new marking criteria around different aspects of the e-portfolio that I realized that when I'm looking through them, these are the things that I'm kind of considering when I'm looking at who's good and who's not. And it was mostly because I was noticing that some students don't have a lot of experience. They've never had a job before. So they're right at the beginning of their journey. This doesn't mean what they're doing is wrong. It just means that they're just at the beginning of their journey. Whereas you've got others who've got all this wealth of experience because they've had jobs before, they're mature students, they're doing a career change, you know, and what they're developing is of a completely different nature and level. And I wanted to recognize that difference. This is the seminar series. If you think that's a lot, it was. It was a lot. It was a lot for me, and it was a lot for my students. So let's see what improved. So the portfolio structure improved, absolutely. Reflection heavily improved. There's improvement seen with feedback and engagement with that feedback and the improvements across the portfolio. Again, helped me, you know, link up with the class, helped me to make those kind of relationships. Student needs. They needed less time, less workload burden. This was too much for them. They wanted seminars to be more workshop-based, more employability focused. Here are some examples. As you can see, that again, you know, we're starting to move now into focused career goals because we literally have a seminar that helps them think about doing a SWOT analysis, understanding the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, reflecting on that, building action plans, reflecting on the action plans at the next formative stage, you know, and doing very clear use of reflection models in their reflections of the work they're doing in each of the modules. And then focusing on competencies. So here we can see that part of the action plan, they had competencies or cultural competencies, we had networking with a few others, and then they reflected on how they did with those across the year. Mahara went up in flames. Unfortunately, stopped interacting with the assessment. So it was a bit horrific. Students were drowning. We had way too much work for them to do, both as part of the course and part of the e-portfolio. So it just was not working. So then we moved to iteration. This is the last iteration. This is this year. Still kept seminar series, but we reduced it down considerably. We created a specific day for them to work on the e-portfolios in class. So not having to do that independently. Still the same kind of concepts. We kind of narrowed down the focus of the seminars to specifically be around academic development, career readiness, research and development, and personal effectiveness. Created a new criteria. I was into time, so as you can see, this influenced my approach. This is just the criteria. The rubric is much more kind of involved compared to this. We started doing things in Quarto because Mahara fell down, and Quarto is a new skill for them to take on board. Students got caught up in the technology and they stopped doing the reflection. So in the end, you had to come back in and be like, okay, you can use whatever platform you want. Okay, just produce me something that the actual focus is on your reflection. It's not on your technological skills here. Students still saw it as a low priority because unfortunately our program is very, very heavy and very full on. And that meant that later on in the years, we had a bit of a attendance issue. So these are just some of the challenges. And they're still feeling overloaded. They're like, why do I have all of this stuff to do? But we tried to, like, halfway through the year, they're like, we don't know why we're doing it, right? So then I had to do another session with them to really help them understand what the e-portfolio was for. And it was about digital storytelling, personal professional development, skills and work portfolios. We showed them a map of their skills journey throughout the term so they could see why these seminars were put in at the times that they were put in to help them along this journey, and so they could understand where they were going and how they were going to get there. This is just some of the feedback we had from students. The waste of time one cut me to the core, but you know, it's fine. It's fine. I just spent every Sunday of my life creating these seminars. It was fine. No, honestly, it was absolutely fine. We completely understand. Had a lot of stuff on. They really like the feedback that I'm providing. They want it to be a bit more flexible because of the workload in the class. They didn't want to come on a Monday morning if they didn't have morning classes. And some of them didn't even look at the feedback. They're like, I've just got too much to deal with. I can't deal with this too. So we'll see what the portfolios look like after this year. But sort of my reflections of the year were like, I'm going to get to my lovely reflections because I do have them here. Generally, make sure that you are reviewing students' feedback regularly and you're making iterations as long as you go. So you're improving this assessment for students because it's for them, right? If it's not helping them, then what's the point of doing it ultimately? It overloaded me because I created a lot of these seminars from scratch, right? And I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in career pedagogy. I'm not an expert in any of these kind of things, but I had to learn so that I could teach them. And so they weren't done the best way possible. So we will be definitely leveraging a lot of the existing stuff at King's, like the Entrepreneur Institute and things like that, to help take some of that burden off. Reflection is incredibly powerful, and I hope my students walk away with that kind of concept of actually reflection is powerful, and it can really help them to really move towards where they want to be, understand who they are, what they want out of life, not only professionally, but also personally too. And students need to see the value and ownership of what they're doing. I think that's really important. And just some top tips. Make sure you're scaffolding everything for the portfolio. Without scaffolding, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to do reflection points. We introduced a new figure this year called Whiskers Meow, who's a student doing the MSc and had many examples for Whiskers, so that he could share that with the group. Need to make sure that, you know, it's they don't get too sort of bogged down into the nitty-gritty of stuff, that everything is authentic, that it's the merging of their worlds ultimately in this piece, and that we're hearing and listening to students and making changes as we need to. And just some next things for next year is more revision, more changes. We're moving now to termly seminar days, moving away from the Mondays, clearer framing, enhanced mapping to skills. We've got a skills framework in place now, and generally just using this space for students to grow, and also by identifying what kind of barriers, ambitions they have, not just the achievements that they have. And this is our MSc program, if anybody is interested in. And yeah, sorry, I know when I was kind of
One question, guys. One.
Sorry.
You choose.